The rain had finally loosened its grip on the city, leaving the streets slick and shining like broken glass. Street lamps flickered in tired arcs of yellow, their reflections twisting in the puddles, while the muffled roar of taverns spilled out from side alleys. Laughter, music, voices trying to bury despair. Silas Kane moved through it all with the satchel tucked under his arm, his trench coat hanging heavy with damp, every step deliberate. The boy walked beside him, quieter now, his earlier tremors dulled but not gone. He carried the night's images in his eyes, blood splashed on stone, knives flashing in the dark, men falling with the weight of their choices. Silas knew that look. Once it settled in, it never left. They reached his office on Dunley Street, a modest second-floor space wedged above a pawn shop that sold brass trinkets and false promises. Silas unlocked the door and guided the boy inside. The smell of old paper, coffee grounds, and cigarette smoke welcomed them like an old, fraying coat. A single lamp clicked on, casting long shadows across the worn rug and stacks of case files that lined the walls. "Sit," Silas said quietly. The boy obeyed, sliding into the chair opposite the detective's desk, his shoulders hunched, his hands restless. Silas placed the satchel down carefully on the desk's scarred surface. For a long moment, he simply stared at it. The wax seal caught the lamplight, a crest that churned old memories from the depths of his mind. The IT was a shield divided into quarters, each marked with symbols. Oak leaves, a dagger, a serpent coiled around a crown. He had seen it once before, years ago, etched into a signet ring worn by a man he'd trusted. A man who had pulled him out of fire when no one else would. A man who had later disappeared, leaving behind only questions that Silas's chest tightened. He muttered under his breath, "So it's you." The boy tilted his head. "You know that mark?" Silas didn't answer immediately. He reached into a drawer, drew out a pocket knife, and slid it under the wax seal. The crack of breaking wax echoed louder than it should have in the small office. He opened the satchel, pulling out a thick leather-bound ledger. The edges were worn, the pages yellowed, but the weight of it was undeniable. He flipped it open. Names sprawled across the first pages in cramped handwriting. Names of men he recognized, street captains, enforcers, smugglers. Some had marks beside them, small symbols he knew well. A circle for debt, a cross for death, a crown for loyalty. He turned another page, his eyes narrowing. More names, but these weren't just the small players. These were officials, judges, inspectors, aldermen, people who wore clean suits by day and took blood money by night. Silas's cigarette trembled slightly between his fingers as he scanned the list. This ledger was more than evidence. It was a map of rot woven into the city's veins. And then, a page deeper in, his hand froze. His own name was there, Silas Kane. Next to it, a mark. Not debt, not death. A dagger. The boy leaned forward. "What does it mean?" Silas shut the book with a sharp snap, his jaw set. He forced his tone flat, steady. "It means we're closer to the truth than I thought." But inside, something shifted. He felt a coldness crawl through him. Someone had placed him in this ledger, not as a hunter, but as prey. Someone who knew his past, his methods, maybe even his weaknesses. And the crest on the seal told him it came from a man who had once called him brother. That he leaned back in his chair, the smoke from his cigarette curling upward, blurring the lamplight. His thoughts twisted in 1,000 directions, but one truth stood out. In this city, betrayal wore the face you trusted most. "Get some rest," Silas told the boy. "Tomorrow we start digging." The boy hesitated. Digging for what? Silas's eyes lingered on the satchel, hard as stone. For the mask, and for the face behind it. The city outside groaned under the weight of its secrets. In the dim office, with rain still whispering at the windows, Silas Kane knew the hunt was no longer about uncovering crimes. It was about unmasking betrayal and surviving the blade already aimed at his back. Morning came reluctantly, a pale wash of light breaking through clouds the color of old bruises. The city never slept, but it did change faces. The laughter of drunks gave way to the creak of wagons, the hawking of street vendors, the thrum of industry awakening. The stink of coal fires drifted down from the factories, settling into every coat, every lung, until the whole city smelled of smoke and ash. Silas hadn't slept. He had spent the night with the ledger open on his desk, cigarette stubs scattered like spent bullets in the ashtray. Every page whispered danger. Every name was another knot in a rope strangling the city. But it was the crest on the seal that gnawed at him the most. The boy stirred on the cot in the corner, mumbling in uneasy dreams. Silas studied him in the dim light, then turned back to the ledger. He needed answers, and for that, he had to risk stepping into the very places he'd sworn never to return at BY mid-morning. Silas was in the old quarter, the part of the city where cobblestones cracked under carriage wheels and the buildings leaned like drunks holding each other up. He walked into the Rusted Crown, a tavern that smelled of beer gone sour and secrets fermenting in the dark. The barkeep, a gaunt man with a scar along his cheek, looked up and stiffened. "Kane." "Morning, Finn." Silas tapped ash from his cigarette, letting it fall on the bar's sticky wood. "I'm looking for someone." Finn's lips curled. "Aren't you always?" "Who this time?" Silas slid a slip of paper across the counter. On it, he'd sketched the crest from the ledger. "Seen this before?" Finn's eyes flicked to it, then away too quickly. No, Silas didn't move. He let the silence stretch, heavy as lead. The tavern's few patrons, dockhands hunched over mugs, shifted uneasily. Finally, Finn sighed, rubbing the scar on his cheek. "Old families. The kind who built half this city on bones and bricks. Most of them dead or gone. Why dig there, Kane?" "Because one of them isn't gone," Silas said flatly to Finn's gaze darkened. "You're chasing ghosts. Dangerous ones. If you're smart, you'll burn that page and walk away." "Never been accused of being smart," Silas muttered. He pocketed the slip and turned, ignoring the barkeep's warning. Outside, the day had grown grayer, rain threatening again. Silas lit another cigarette and exhaled slowly, his thoughts circling. The crest belonged to the Dawes family. Powerful, ruthless, a dynasty that had dissolved when its patriarch vanished years ago. But Silas knew better. He knew one Dawes had survived, Caleb Dawes. His mentor, his betrayer. The memory was sharp, a blade he'd never dulled. Caleb had trained him when Silas was young, teaching him how to track men in shadows, how to listen for the truth hidden in lies. They had worked cases together, bled together. Silas had trusted him more than anyone, until the night Caleb disappeared, leaving behind a trail of bodies and whispers of corruption. Now, that same crest marked a ledger of names soaked in blood. Silas's gut twisted. The city wasn't just whispering anymore. It was laughing at him, mocking the blind trust he once gave that a voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Detective Kane." Silas turned. A woman stood near the mouth of the alley, her coat drawn tight, her hat pulled low. He recognized her, Elara Vance, an information broker who dealt in secrets the way others dealt in coins. Her eyes were sharp, always calculating, like she was already 3 steps ahead of every conversation. "You're far from your usual haunts," she said, stepping closer. "So are you," Silas replied. Elara's gaze flicked to the edge of the ledger peeking from his coat. "Word travels fast. You've stirred the nest. Then you already know what I'm carrying." "I know enough," she said softly, "and I know whose shadow stretches behind it." Silas's eyes narrowed. "Say it." She hesitated, glancing around to be sure they were alone. "Caleb Dawes." The name hung in the air, heavy, poisonous. Thus Silas's jaw tightened. He'd expected it, but hearing it aloud reopened wounds he thought had scarred. That Alara's expression softened, though her voice stayed cool. "You're not the only one he left behind, Kane, but you may be the only one still alive who can stand against him." Silas dropped his cigarette, grinding it into the cobblestones. "Then I'll find him, and I'll see what mask he's wearing now." Elara touched his arm briefly, a rare gesture of sincerity. "Be careful. The man you remember isn't the man you'll face." With that, she slipped back into the crowd, vanishing like smoke. Silas stood in the rain-streaked street, the city closing in around him. His pulse was steady, but inside, something warred. Anger at betrayal, sorrow for trust lost, and a cold determination sharpening into steel. The betrayer's mask was out there, and Silas Kane would tear it away, even if the face beneath was the one he once called brother. The city was restless that night, its heart beating in sync with the hum of electric lamps and the low growl of storm clouds that refused to release their rain. Silas Kane walked the streets as though he belonged to them, his coat pulled tight against the cold, his mind heavier than the revolver resting at his hip. He had spent the day turning over stones, pushing at doors better left shut, drawing threads from the ledger until they began to knot together. Too many of the names led back to one circle of influence: smugglers on the docks, protection rackets in the eastern quarter, even a few hands inside the constabulary itself. The circle was tight, deliberate. Someone was orchestrating it with a conductor's hand. And that hand, Silas knew now, belonged to Caleb Dawes. He tried not to think of Caleb as he last saw him, standing in the flickering light of a burning warehouse, his face calm while the world collapsed around them. Caleb had told him then, "Trust is a luxury this city cannot afford, Kane. Learn that, or it will kill you." Then he vanished, and Silas was left with smoke, blood, and betrayal. Tonight, the ledger confirmed what instinct already whispered. Caleb had not vanished. He had simply donned a new mask. Silas turned down a narrow street where gaslights sputtered weakly, casting sickly halos on the cobblestones. Ahead was the Ashford house, a crumbling estate turned gambling den. Its reputation was blackened by debts, disappearances, and a clientele with more knives than manners. It was also, according to the ledger, a place where Caleb's influence still lingered. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and sweat, the sound of dice clattering and cards slapping on felt tables. A piano played badly in the corner, drowned out by the roar of men losing money they didn't have. Silas walked through it like a ghost, his eyes searching faces, every nerve on edge. At the back table sat Marcus Vane, a fixer with a reputation for selling loyalty to the highest bidder. Silas approached, and Vane looked up, his smirk faltering. "Kane, to what do I owe the displeasure?" "Information." Silas dropped into the chair across from him, setting the ledger on the table with a deliberate thud. "Tell me about Dawes." The smirk vanished. Vane glanced at the book, then around the room as though the shadows themselves might be listening. His voice dropped to a hiss. "You don't speak that name here." "I just did." Silas leaned forward, his gaze cold. "Now it's your turn." Vane licked his lips, fingers twitching as if they longed for the safety of a knife. "He's alive. More than alive. He's building something bigger than anything before. He doesn't just want the city's underworld. He wants the city itself." Silas's jaw clenched. "And the ledger?" Vane's eyes darted to it. "Insurance. He keeps records of everyone. Friends, enemies, debts, favors. If you've crossed him, your name is in there. If you've served him, your name is in there. It's his way of holding the city's throat in one hand. And if you found it," Vane swallowed hard, "then he'll come for you." Silas closed the ledger slowly, the leather creaking like old bones. "Let him." Vane leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper. "You don't understand. Dawes doesn't forgive betrayal, real or imagined. If he believes you turned on him, even once, you're already dead." Silas stood, sliding the ledger back into his coat. His eyes were steel. "Then it's only fair. He taught me betrayal first." He left the gambling den with the weight of Vane's warning pressing against him, but it did not shake him. If anything, it carved his resolve deeper. The mask of the betrayer was no longer a mystery. It had a name, a face, a history written into his own scars. The boy was waiting back at the office, restless, pacing like a caged animal. When Silas entered, the boy looked up, his eyes sharp with unspoken questions. "You found something," the boy said. Silas dropped into his chair, lighting another cigarette. Smoke curled upward, clouding the lamplight. "I found him." The boy frowned. "Who?" Silas exhaled slowly, his voice low, almost reverent in its bitterness. "The man who taught me everything. The man who betrayed me. Caleb Dawes." The name meant nothing to the boy, but the weight of it hung heavy in the room. Silas leaned back, staring at the ceiling as though the cracked plaster might give answers. "This city wears masks, boy. Smiling ones, dangerous ones. But the worst mask of all is betrayal. It looks like a friend, a mentor, a brother. And when it falls, the face beneath is one you never want to see. The boy said nothing. He understood enough to keep quiet. Outside, thunder rolled low across the skyline, shaking the windows in their frames. Somewhere in the dark streets, Silas knew Caleb Dawes was watching, waiting, moving his pieces across the board. And Silas Kane, betrayed but unbroken, was ready to play the game to its bloody end. The mask had slipped. The face was revealed. Now came the reckoning. The rain came at dawn, heavy and relentless, pounding against rooftops and washing the soot from the air in greasy black rivulets. Silas Kane sat by the office window, a cigarette burning low between his fingers, watching as the city blurred into gray shapes. The storm had a way of swallowing sound, muting the usual chaos of the streets. For once, the city seemed to hold its breath. He could feel it in his bones. The quiet before something worse. That on the desk lay the ledger, closed but never silent, its weight like an anchor pulling at him. Across from it, spread in uneven piles, were old clippings and records Silas had kept over the years, documents from cases that should have been buried, reports that the city wanted forgotten. Together, they formed a tapestry of violence, a record of wars that had scarred the streets and the men who walked them. And threaded through them all, like a ghost refusing exorcism, was Caleb Dawes. Silas rubbed his temples, the smoke stinging his eyes. He remembered those wars all too well. Gang wars that lit up the docks with fire, shootouts in alleys where the cobblestones still bore the stains, betrayals that carved deep lines across the city map. They called them wars in whispers, but no flags were flown, no victories declared. Only bodies counted, and debts that never stopped collecting. He had fought in those wars, though not as a soldier. As a detective, sometimes sanctioned, sometimes rogue, he had moved between factions, unraveling plots, cutting deals, and spilling blood when he had to. Caleb had been there too, guiding him, sharpening him, teaching him how to survive in the smoke and ruin. And now, all these years later, those forgotten wars were echoing back. The boy stirred on the cot, sitting up with a groan. His hair stuck out in wild tufts, his face pale from sleepless nights. "You haven't rested," he muttered. "Neither have you," Silas replied without turning. The boy's eyes drifted to the ledger. "What's in there? It's bigger than us, isn't it?" Silas flicked ash into the tray. "Everything's bigger than us. The trick is not letting it crush you." The boy hesitated, then asked the question that had been burning since yesterday. "Who is Dawes, really?" Silas finally turned, his gaze sharp but not unkind. For a long time, he said nothing, weighing the words. Then, with a sigh, he leaned back in his chair. "He was my teacher," Silas began. "When I was younger, green and reckless, he showed me the ropes. Taught me how to track men, how to read a room, how to make people talk without laying a hand on them. More than that, he taught me how to survive this city. He was the closest thing I ever had to a brother." The boy listened silently, wide-eyed. Silas's voice darkened. "But survival has a cost." Caleb believed trust was weakness. He believed loyalty was a weapon to be used, not given. I didn't see it then, but everything he taught me was bent toward control. He wanted me sharp, but also dependent. He wanted me to be his blade. A bitter smile touched his lips. The night he disappeared, I thought he died. But the truth? He simply shed his skin. Betrayal was his rebirth. And now he's out there, wearing another mask, pulling strings like a puppeteer. The boy frowned. "And you? What did you do in those wars?" Silas's eyes grew distant, clouded by memory. "I survived. I bled. I lost people I cared about. And I did things I can't take back." He ground out the cigarette. "Some wars don't end. They just wait for you to stumble back into them." A knock at the door cut through the heavy silence. Sharp, insistent. Silas rose, hand brushing the revolver at his side. He opened the door to find Captain Mireille Gray, one of the few officers in the constabulary he still trusted. Her coat was soaked through, her hair plastered against her face, but her eyes burned with urgency. "Kane," she said, stepping inside without invitation. "We need to talk." Silas shut the door. I guessed as much. You wouldn't be here otherwise. She dropped a folder onto his desk, water droplets spotting the leather cover. Another body, found in the eastern quarter. Same pattern, throat cut, message left in blood. Only this time, she hesitated. The message had your name on it. The boy stiffened. Silas remained calm, though inside, his pulse quickened. He flipped open the folder. Grainy photos stared back. A man sprawled in an alley, eyes wide, terror frozen on his face. On the wall behind him, scrawled in jagged crimson letters, Silas Kane. The past is never dead. Silas closed the folder slowly. He's calling me out. Gray's expression hardened. This isn't just about you. Whoever's behind this wants the city to bleed again. They're dragging us back into those old wars. Silas lit another cigarette, exhaling smoke toward the ceiling. Then I suppose I'll answer the call. The boy shifted uneasily. You can't do it alone. Silas gave a short, humorless laugh. I've always done it alone. Gray shook her head. Not this time. This isn't just gangs or smugglers anymore. This is deeper, political, old money, families with roots that run deeper than the sewers. If Caleb Dawes is behind it, she trailed off, unwilling to finish the thought. Silas finished it for her. Then we're not fighting men. We're fighting ghosts. And ghosts are hard to kill. The storm outside raged harder, wind rattling the windows as if the city itself protested what was coming. Silas Kane stood in the middle of it, shoulders squared, his gaze steady. The forgotten wars were no longer forgotten. They were alive again, their echoes building into a roar. And this time, there would be no hiding from them. The storm eased by afternoon, though the clouds lingered, heavy and low, like an audience waiting for the curtain to rise. Silas stepped into the streets, coat collar up against the drizzle. The boy remained behind under Gray's watch, his protests ignored. This part of the work wasn't for wide eyes or unsteady hands. There were doors Silas had avoided for years, doors that once led to blood-soaked rooms and broken oaths. But now the past was clawing at him, demanding to be opened again. He lit a cigarette as he walked, each step carrying him deeper into the city's underbelly. Past shuttered storefronts, past alleys where kids huddled under rags, past walls pockmarked with bullet holes that had never been repaired, only weathered into the stone like scars on old skin. Every block whispered memories of the wars. He finally stopped before a decaying warehouse near the docks. The place stank of salt, tar, and rust, its bricks weeping from decades of damp. To most, it was abandoned. To Silas, it was a graveyard. This was where one of the worst battles of the Forgotten Wars had played out. He could still see it, torches lighting the night, men screaming, gunfire cracking like thunder. He remembered dragging bodies into the dark, trying to find who among his allies was still breathing. He remembered Caleb standing tall in the chaos, calm as a man pouring tea. The war had ended here for many, but for Silas, it had only begun. He pulled open the rusted door. The hinges screamed like wounded things. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and rot. Broken crates littered the floor, their markings faded but still legible. Imports from places that no longer existed on trade maps. A rat skittered across his path, bold, unafraid. Silas's footsteps echoed as he moved deeper into the shadows. He wasn't looking for ghosts this time. He was looking for Ronan Vale. Ronan had been a lieutenant in the wars, once Caleb's right hand before ambition soured in a rivalry. Silas had heard whispers that Ronan still lingered in the city, pulling scraps of power from whatever was left of his old empire. If anyone knew where Caleb's shadow was moving, it would be him. Vale. Silas's voice bounced off the cracked walls. I know you're here. For a long moment, silence. Then, from above, a voice rasped like gravel. Kane, I wondered when the dead would come knocking. Ronan descended the stairs at the far end, his boots heavy, his frame broader than Silas remembered. His hair was streaked gray now, his face mapped with lines carved by years of violence. But his eyes, sharp, wolfish, hadn't dulled. You've aged, Ronan said, circling like a predator reacquainting itself with old prey. So have you, Silas answered evenly. Ronan laughed, though there was no warmth in it. Didn't expect to see you again. Thought you'd buried yourself along with the rest of us. I tried, Silas admitted. He drew the ledger from his coat, its leather cover catching the dim light. But the past doesn't stay buried. Ronan's eyes flicked to it, then back to Silas. His grin faded. Ah, that book. I've heard whispers. Men killed for a single page. What makes you think bringing it here won't get you the same? Because you want to know what's inside, Silas said. Ronan studied him, then chuckled darkly. Still sharp, still reckless. He stepped closer. Tell me, Kane, does it have his name? Silas didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence stretched until Ronan's face twisted, part rage, part satisfaction. Dawes, where is he? Silas asked quietly. Ronan leaned against a pillar, the wood groaning beneath his weight. If I knew, I'd have slit his throat myself years ago. Man ruined me, took what was mine, then vanished like smoke. Left me with nothing but bones and ash. You survived, Silas said. Ronan smirked bitterly. Survival isn't living, Kane. It's rotting slower than the rest. They stood in the dripping silence, two relics of a war no one spoke of, bound by scars and betrayals. Finally, Ronan straightened. I don't know where he is, but I know where his money moves. There's a banker uptown, name's Halden. Clean suit, polished smile, rotten to the marrow. Dawes uses him as a funnel. Find Halden, and you'll catch Dawes' scent. Silas pocketed the ledger. Why tell me? Ronan's smile was grim. Because I want him found. And if it takes you, so be it. Just remember, Kane, whatever mask he wears now, the man underneath hasn't changed. He'll slit your throat with the same hand he once used to guide you. Silas nodded once. Then I'll be ready. As he turned to leave, Ronan's voice followed, low and warning. Echoes, Kane. That's all we are. Don't let the past drag you under. It has teeth. Outside, the rain had thinned to a mist. The streets glistened with reflections of broken lights. Silas lit another cigarette, inhaling the acrid smoke as his mind churned. Holden. The name was new, but the game was the same. Money, power, corruption. Caleb was no ghost hiding in ruins. He was moving, growing, reshaping the city in silence. The forgotten wars hadn't ended at all. They had only shifted battlefields, and Silas Kane was walking straight back into the heart of them. The city's upper quarter looked like another world entirely. Marble facades, wrought iron balconies, lamps burning soft golden halos instead of the sputtering gas fires down below. The stink of coal smoke and rust was replaced by perfume and polished stone. But Silas had walked these streets before, and he knew. The rot here was only dressed in finer clothes. Halden and Company. Financial Trust stood like a cathedral to greed at the corner of Ashford and Crown. The building's doors were carved oak, its windows tall and spotless, its guards polite but cold-eyed. To the ordinary citizen, it was a fortress of wealth. To Silas Kane, it was a vault of secrets, and perhaps the first real glimpse of Caleb Dawes' hand since the wars he pushed through the doors. The smell inside was one of ink, paper, and expensive cigars. Clerks moved briskly between desks, quills scratching, ledgers snapping shut with military precision. The air was heavy with the quiet hum of order, but beneath it Silas heard what few could. Fear disguised as routine. At the far end of the room, seated behind a desk large enough to bury a man in, was Arthur Halden. His suit was immaculate, dark as midnight, his tie knotted perfectly. His hair was slicked back, and his smile, when he looked up, was the kind that promised everything and meant nothing. Mr. Kane, Halden said smoothly, as though they'd met before. His voice carried no surprise. To what do I owe the visit? Silas lit a cigarette, ignoring the sharp intake of breath from the nearest clerk. Business, he said. His voice echoed off the polished marble floor, low and steady. Halden gestured to the chair opposite his desk. Then let's discuss it. Silas sat, the leather creaking under his weight. He placed the ledger on the desk between them, its presence heavy, undeniable. Halden's smile faltered for the briefest instant. Too brief for most to notice, but not for Silas. You recognize it, Silas said. Not a question. Halden folded his hands, recovering quickly. I've heard whispers, dangerous whispers, books that don't belong to the living. You should be careful carrying such a thing. Careful's not my strong suit. Silas leaned forward. Tell me about Dawes. The smile froze. For a moment, Halden's composure cracked. He glanced toward the tall windows, as though expecting someone, or fearing they were already there. I don't know the man, Halden said finally. Wrong answer. Silas's tone was soft, but it cut like glass. You move his money. You hide his traits. You keep the city blind while he fattens on it. Halden shifted in his seat, his fingers tightening until the knuckles whitened. You don't understand, Kane. Men like Dawes, they don't ask. They take. You think I want to be part of this? He owns me. Everyone makes choices, Silas said. And choices come with consequences. Halden's mask of control slipped further. Sweat beaded at his temple. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. If he knows you're sniffing around, you won't live the week. The wars you fought, they never ended. Dawes just found a cleaner battlefield. He runs the city from the shadows, and those of us with sense, we keep our heads down. Silas tapped ash into Halden's pristine ashtray. You've kept yours down so long you've forgotten how to lift it. The banker's jaw tightened. His eyes darted again to the windows, then to the clerks. Too many ears, too many risks. Finally, with a tremor in his voice, he said, There's a warehouse. Not the docks, too obvious. This one's inland, near Ashmere rail yards. He funnels shipments through there, disguised as machinery parts. Inside, you'll find records, proof of everything. But if you go there, Kane, you'll be walking straight into his teeth. Silas closed the ledger, sliding it back into his coat. Then I'll bring sharper ones. Halden's face paled. You don't get it. Men like Dawes don't just kill you. They erase you. They bury your name, your memory. In 10 years, no one will even know you existed. Silas rose, the chair groaning against the marble floor. He exhaled smoke through his nose, eyes steady. If I'm forgotten, so be it. But he won't be, not while I'm still breathing. The clerk by the door shifted nervously as Silas strode past. Behind him, Halden sagged into his seat, the polished mask of the banker cracking fully now into fear. He knew Dawes would learn of this conversation, and when he did, Halden's days would be numbered. But Silas didn't care. The wars had come back, and they demanded blood. Outside, dusk painted the city in bruised shades of purple and gray. The streets hummed with restless life, neon flickering to life above taverns and dens. Silas lit another cigarette, the flare of his lighter cutting briefly against the gloom. He thought of Ronan's words. Echoes came. That's all we are. But these echoes weren't fading. They were growing louder, reverberating through the bones of the city, each one pulling Silas closer to a reckoning that had been waiting since the first shot was fired in those forgotten wars. Now there was a warehouse at Ashmere, a place where Caleb's ghost turned real again, where money, power, and betrayal converged. And Silas Kane, scarred but unbroken, was heading straight for it. The wars weren't forgotten. They were alive, bleeding, waiting. And this time, Silas wouldn't just survive them. He intended to finish them. The city did not sleep, but it wore its insomnia differently in the upper districts, where the alleys below rattled with drunken brawls and neon shadows. Here the night glittered with chandeliers, laughter spilling from gilded doorways, and the music of violins drifting across manicured courtyards. Men and women in evening attire walked with measured grace, their words dripping with politics, business, and scandal. The crown of the city, Silas thought bitterly, polished, adorned, and rotting underneath. Silas Kane stood at the edge of it all, a dark figure against the marble steps. His coat smelled of smoke and rain, a poor match for the perfume-laden air of the Ashworth Club, where tonight's gala promised to draw the city's most powerful. Bankers, industrial barons, judges, and politicians would gather under its stained-glass roof. And somewhere among them, Silas knew, was another mask worn by Caleb Dawes' hand-picked loyalists. The invitation in his pocket was forged, a favor from an old contact who owed him more than he cared to admit. He wasn't dressed for the occasion, not properly. His tie was crooked, his shoes scuffed. But Silas never needed polish to command attention. His scars were his introduction, his silence his threat. Inside, the air glittered with smoke and crystal. Waiters drifted with trays of champagne. Laughter rippled like a false lullaby, and the grand hall echoed with the low hum of an orchestra. Silas scanned the crowd. He saw them immediately. Men with bellies full of other people's labor, women draped in jewels heavy enough to buy 10 lives on the docks, voices raised in empty debates about trade routes and tariffs. Yet beneath the surface, Silas read the truth. These were not leaders. They were custodians of Dawes's empire, fattened and decorated, puppets dancing for a master no one dare name, to the center of the room. Beneath a chandelier that glittered like a crown of glass stood Counselor Adrian Wells. His hair was silver, his posture impeccable, his smile the carefully practiced one a man who had never lost a battle he didn't already know the outcome of. He was the kind of man newspapers adored, a reformer, a philanthropist, a visionary. But Silas had seen Wells's name in the ledger. Next to it had been a note in Dawes's handwriting. Crown secured. Silas felt the old bitterness rise like bile. This was Dawes's genius. He didn't just own the shadows. He owned the spotlight. While the gangs bled in alleys and the soldiers from forgotten wars rotted in graves, Dawes crowned his chosen men in gold and let them rule in daylight. A poisoned crown, bright to the eye, deadly to the touch. A waiter passed by, and Silas snagged a glass of champagne without breaking his gaze from Wells. He didn't drink. He only needed the disguise of civility. From the corner of his eye, he noticed movement, a woman approaching. She was younger than the rest of the gathered elite, her gown a dark green that shimmered like the sea, her eyes sharp and knowing. She stopped beside him, studying him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "You don't belong here," she said softly, a statement rather than a question. Silas smirked faintly. "Neither do half of them. Difference is, they pretend better." Her lips curved slightly, though her eyes never left his. "You're Kane, aren't you? The detective." The name was a whisper here, a rumor that had somehow walked into the lion's den. Silas didn't confirm it. Instead, he asked, "And you are?" Someone who knows Counselor Wells doesn't shake hands unless someone else is pulling the strings. That caught his attention. She tilted her glass toward the counselor across the room, her voice dropping lower. "He wears the crown, but it isn't his. And if you're here, then you already know whose it really is." Silas studied her carefully. Trust was a currency rarer than gold and more dangerous than a knife. But her words carried the edge of someone who had seen beneath the velvet masks and lived to tell of it. Before he could answer, applause erupted as Wells took the stage at the far end of the hall. He stood beneath the chandelier crown, the orchestra silencing, the voices fading into reverent quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen," Wells began, his voice rich and commanding. "Tonight we celebrate not only prosperity, but the promise of a greater tomorrow for our city. Together, we have built something enduring, something that will carry us into an age of order, progress, and strength." Silas's jaw clenched. He had heard speeches like this before, in tents before battles, in alleys before raids, in council halls before betrayals. The words were different, but the intent was the same. Control. The woman beside him leaned in, her breath warm against his ear. "Listen closely. Every phrase is his master's voice. Wells doesn't speak for himself. He speaks for Dawes." Silas didn't move, didn't respond, but inside, the truth hardened like stone. The wars hadn't ended. They had only changed their uniforms. And if Dawes wore the poison crown, then Silas Kane would be the one to break it. The applause faded into the tinkling of glasses, the rustle of silk, the chatter of alliances being forged in whispers. Counselor Wells stepped down from the dais with the grace of a man who knew every eye was upon him. Every smile sharpened with expectation. He drifted through the crowd, shaking hands, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, pausing only long enough to let each guest bask in his presence. Silas didn't move toward him. Men like Wells weren't approached. They came to you when they smelled advantage or threat. And Silas was not here to flatter. He was here to watch, to listen, to see which shadows moved when the crown gleamed brightest. The woman in the green gown lingered at his side, sipping her champagne with the ease of someone practiced at blending in. "They'll notice you soon," she murmured. "Men like Wells have eyes in every glass raised, every servant passing by." "I'm counting on it," Silas replied, his voice low. She studied him, then asked, "Why risk this?" "Dawes doesn't lose. Those who try to cut the strings end up as ornaments at his table, or corpses in alleys." Silas let the question hang between them. Why risk it? Because the city was suffocating. Because Caleb Dawes had turned it into a chessboard where men and women were pawns, sacrificed without thought. Because if no one dared strike at the crown, then Dawes would rule forever. But he didn't say that. Instead, he said, "Everyone loses eventually, even kings." Her eyes lingered on him, unreadable. Then she turned, vanishing into the crowd as smoothly as she had appeared, leaving Silas with the faintest trace of perfume and questions that had no easy answers. A hand clapped his shoulder, heavy and deliberate. Silas turned to face a man broad as a wall, his suit straining across a barrel chest, his jaw covered in coarse stubble. His smile was that of a wolf sizing up its prey. "You don't look like one of us," the man said, voice thick with drink but sharp beneath it. "I'm not," Silas replied calmly. The man's grin widened. "Good. Too many silk-spined cowards in this room. Name's Marcus Heller, shipping magnate. And you are?" Silas gave him the name he always gave when he wanted attention, but not truth. "Kane." Something flickered in Heller's eyes. Recognition, or perhaps just curiosity. He leaned in, lowering his voice. That Kane. Thought you were a rumor. A ghost. But here you are, drinking with the crown's keepers." Silas's lips curved faintly. Ghosts go where they're needed. Heller laughed, a booming sound that drew glances. "I like you. Careful, though. This room eats men alive. And the counselor, he eats better than most." Silas's gaze slid past Heller to where Wells was now surrounded by a cluster of admirers, judges, investors, even a bishop with hands folded in pious deceit. They leaned in close as Wells spoke, each hanging on his words as if they were scripture. And behind them, in the shadows near the bar, Silas saw them. Two men in plain suits, their eyes scanning constantly, never lingering on the champagne or the music. Security, not for the guests, for the secrets being whispered. "Tell me, Heller," Silas said casually, "what's the counselor's crown worth?" Heller's laughter cut short. His expression hardened, suspicion slipping in. "Worth everything. Worth nothing. Depends who's holding it." He lowered his voice further. "Best not to ask too many questions. Men who do end up weighted down on my ships." The words were a warning, veiled in jest. But Silas had spent too long in the underworld not to hear the truth in them. The poison crown wasn't just metaphorical. It was enforced, guarded, drenched in blood. Wells moved closer now, making his slow orbit through the room. His eyes swept across Silas like a beam of light. He didn't pause, didn't betray recognition, but Silas knew. He knew he'd been marked. Moments later, another man appeared at his side. Thin, sharp-nosed, his glasses glinting under the chandeliers. "Mr. Kane, is it?" the man asked, his voice oily smooth. Silas raised an eyebrow. "That depends on who's asking. The counselor requests a word." The man gestured toward a side corridor, away from the press of guests. Silas drained the champagne in one swallow. Not for taste, but for time. Then he set the glass on a passing tray and followed. The corridor was quieter, the music muffled by walls heavy with oil paintings of past counselors smiling from gilded frames. Wells waited near a tall, arched window. The city spread behind him like a conquered kingdom. "Mr. Kane," Wells said warmly, as if greeting an old friend. "I was told you joined us tonight. I confess, I didn't believe it." Silas said nothing, only let the silence weigh. Wells smiled wider. "You have a reputation. A man who solves problems others can't. A man who doesn't scare easily. That's rare in times like these." Silas finally spoke, his voice low. "I'm not here to solve your problems. I'm here to see who wears the crown." For a heartbeat, Wells's smile faltered. Then it returned, brighter, polished. Always the detective. always searching for what lies beneath. But be careful, Kane. Sometimes the crown isn't poisoned. Sometimes it's the man who reaches for it. The words lingered like smoke. A threat, a truth, or both. Silas studied him, memorizing every line of his face, every flicker in his eyes. Wells was no mere puppet. He was a willing partner in Dawes's reign, a man who had traded morality for power long ago. And if Silas was right, he was the next piece to fall. The counselor's warning still echoed in Silas's head when the thin aide with the glinting glasses returned. "If that will be all, gentlemen," he said smoothly, gesturing toward the ballroom. But Wells didn't move. He held Silas's gaze for a long moment, two predators testing the other's strength. Then, with a polite smile, he turned away. The aide led Silas back into the noise and glitter, where champagne flowed and laughter rang hollow. Silas didn't stay among the revelers. Instead, he drifted toward the balcony doors. A breath of cold night air slid in as he stepped outside, the noise of the gala muffling behind him. The city stretched below, lanterns burning in the fog, the crooked lines of streets like scars carved into stone. But he wasn't alone. He knew at the moment the door clicked shut, two figures emerged from the shadows at the far end of the balcony. They weren't guests. Their suits were too plain, their shoes too quiet, their eyes too sharp. Dawes's men, Detective Kane, one of them said, voice flat. "The counselor thanks you for your interest, but your presence here has been noted." Silas lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his face. He exhaled smoke slowly, letting it curl between them like a barrier. "Noted? That sounds like the kind of word men use before they try to throw someone off a balcony." Neither smiled. The taller one stepped closer. "Leave this alone, Kane. Dawes's game isn't yours. If you keep pushing, you'll find yourself buried under cobblestones no one remembers." Silas tilted his head, studying them. Funny thing about cobblestones, blood always finds a way through the cracks. The shorter man's hand twitched toward his coat. Silas saw it, a gleam of metal in the lamplight. A pistol hidden but not well enough. His heartbeat slowed, not quickened. His muscles coiled. When a man drew, Silas moved. His cigarette hit the ground, crushed beneath his heel as his elbow snapped up, slamming into the shorter man's wrist. The pistol fired once, muffled by the night, lost under the swell of music inside. Before skittering across the stone tiles, the taller one lunged, but Silas was ready. He pivoted, dragging the first man forward and hurling him into his partner. Both crashed against the railing with a grunt. For a heartbeat, they struggled, tangled in each other's limbs. Silas grabbed the pistol, cold weight heavy in his hand. He didn't fire. Not yet. Instead, he leveled it, voice calm but deadly. "Tell Wells," Silas said, "that the crown he wears is slipping. Tell Dawes I know he's moving his pieces. And tell them both," his voice dropped lower, harsher, "that I'm not afraid to smash the board." The men froze, breathing hard. Then, slowly, they backed away, dragging their wounded pride with them. They disappeared into the shadows, the door shutting quietly behind them. Silas stood alone again, the city sprawled beneath, the pistol cooling in his grip. His pulse thrummed, but not from fear, from certainty. The gala was no celebration, it was a coronation. A signal to all who mattered that Wells was Dawes's crowned puppet, the mask through which the betrayer would rule the city. And Silas had just declared himself an enemy of the throne. He tucked the pistol into his coat and leaned on the balcony railing, staring at the lights flickering through the fog. Somewhere in that haze, Caleb Dawes was watching, smiling behind his poisoned crown. Silas lit another cigarette, the ember glowing against the darkness. "Enjoy it while you can," he murmured into the night. "Because I'm coming for you." Inside, the orchestra swelled. Laughter and applause echoed. But outside, on the balcony, a lone detective stood ready for war. The city held its breath. The fire burned low in the grate, its embers collapsing in on themselves like dying stars. Silas sat in the quiet room above the old tailor's shop, where the windows were boarded and the walls smelled of dust and moth-eaten cloth. It was a safe house, if such places could ever truly be safe, but tonight it felt less like shelter and more like a tomb that on the table before him lay the folded leather wallet he had carried for years. Inside, tucked between faded slips of paper and a cigarette card worn soft from touch, was a photographed .3 men, younger then, standing shoulder to shoulder in uniforms that had long since lost their meaning. Their eyes were bright, their faces sunburnt, their smiles careless in the way only youth could manage. Silas in the middle, his arm around the shoulders of the man on his left, Jonah Creed, the closest thing he had ever had to a brother. On the right stood Eli Mercer, his grin wide, his fists clenched as if he could fight the world and win. Silas stared at it for a long time, listening to the memory of their laughter echoing in his head. But memory was a liar. Jonah was dead, long dead, shot in an alley no wider than a coffin. Eli had betrayed them both, selling their unit's secrets for money and power, aligning himself with men who trafficked in blood and despair. Now Eli Mercer was Dawes' lieutenant, a general in the Empire of Rot. Silas slipped the photograph back into his wallet and rubbed at his eyes. The city outside whispered with rain, water dripping from gutters and cobblestones gleaming like bones. He felt the weight of the years pressing down. The bitter taste of friendship turned to ash that a knock came at the door. 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more. The signal. Silas rose, his joints protesting, and opened the door a crack. The woman from the gala, the one in the green gown, stood there now wrapped in a dark coat, her face pale in the lamplight. "You're hard to find," she said softly. "You followed me anyway," Silas replied. "I had to." She stepped inside, glancing around the empty room. "Word is Mercer knows you're in the city, and he's looking." Silas lit a cigarette, the flame trembling just slightly before he steadied it. "Let him look. He's owed me a conversation." Her eyes narrowed. "A conversation? Kane, Mercer doesn't talk. He burns what he can't buy and buries what he can't burn. If you face him, I will face him." Silas's voice was flat, final. Smoke curled from his lips. "Because this war isn't just Dawes's. It's mine. And it started the day Eli chose his crown of silver over his brothers in the dirt." For a moment, the only sound was the rain tapping at the boards across the window. Then she asked quietly, "And if you can't kill him?" Silas looked down at the glowing tip of a cigarette, then crushed it out in the ashtray. His voice was low, barely more than a whisper. "Then I'll let the ghost decide." The fire popped in the grate. The photograph lay hidden again, but its weight pressed against his chest like an iron shackle. Outside, the city swallowed another night. And somewhere in that darkness, Eli Mercer waited. The rain hadn't let up. It fell in sheets now, pattering against cobblestones and dripping from crooked gutters like the city itself was weeping. Silas stepped into the downpour, collar turned high, cigarette smoke curling into the wet air before vanishing altogether. The streets of Hollow Point, the quarter where the city's bones showed through its skin, were slick and half deserted. What few souls braved the storm moved quickly, heads down, faces hidden beneath hats and scarves. This was where Silas had grown into the man he became, where Jonah, Eli, and he had carved their names into alley walls as boys, laughing at the idea of immortality. Now, each corner felt like a grave. He passed the Black Swan, the tavern where they'd once celebrated their return from the war. He could still hear Jonah's booming laugh, Eli's cocky jokes, the clatter of mugs on scarred oak tables. Tonight, the windows glowed faintly, but the sound inside was muted, weary. Different men sat there now. Different ghosts. Silas didn't stop. He kept moving, boots striking puddles that splashed dirty water onto his trousers. His destination was farther down, in the old rail yard, one of Mercer's known strongholds. But the journey, there was its own kind of penance at a street corner, beneath the dripping awning of a shuttered bakery. A figure stepped out of the shadows. Detective Kane, the man rasped, his voice old, cracked like broken glass. He was hunched, wrapped in layers of rags, but his eyes glittered with recognition. Silas slowed. "Do I know you?" "You knew Jonah." The name cut like a blade. Silas's chest tightened. "Who are you?" "Doesn't matter." The old man's teeth flashed in a grin that was more gums than enamel. "What matters is Mercer. He's down by the yard tonight, just like the old days. Moving crates he doesn't want seen. Guns, maybe. Powder. Something worse. Silas stepped closer, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. Why tell me? The man chuckled, a hollow sound. Because ghosts don't rest easy. Jonah's still walking, you know, still waiting for someone to set it right. Before Silas could speak again, the figure melted back into the rain, vanishing down an alley like smoke blown from a dying fire. For a long moment, Silas stood there, the storm cold against his skin, his pulse heavy in his ears. He wanted to dismiss the man as another street-crazed vagrant, but something in his eyes had been sharp, too sharp, and the mention of Jonah. It was like the city itself had spoken. He turned his steps toward the rail yard. The rail yard was a skeleton of rust and shadows. Long abandoned tracks twisted like veins across cracked concrete, and half-collapsed warehouses leaned against each other, as if trying not to fall. The air smelled of wet iron and coal smoke that no longer burned. Silas moved cautiously, hand brushing the grip of his revolver inside his coat. Lantern light flickered ahead, spilling from the open maw of a warehouse door. Voices carried faintly, men barking orders, the thud of crates shifting, the groan of wood against stone. He crept closer, boots silent on the soaked ground. From the shadows near the entrance, he caught sight of them. Half a dozen men, armed, working under Eli Mercer's command. The crates were heavy, stenciled with symbols Silas recognized. Military marks, stripped from forgotten stockpiles. Weapons, enough to arm a small army. And there, in the center of it all, stood Eli. Time hadn't dulled him. He was broader now, hair cropped shorter, a scar running down his jaw that Silas didn't remember. But the arrogance was the same, the easy grin, the sharp eyes that scanned every corner of the room as if he owned it. He laughed at something one of his men said, clapping him on the shoulder. Silas's breath caught. For a heartbeat. It wasn't Mercer he saw. It was Eli from the photograph, standing with Jonah and him, grinning at a joke only brothers shared. But that man was dead. This one had killed him. Silas pulled back into the shadows, forcing his breath steady. He couldn't rush this. Not with so many guns, not with Mercer in his element. He'd need to wait, to watch, to find the crack in the armor. As the rain hammered the corrugated roof of the warehouse, Silas whispered to himself, voice low, almost prayer-like, "Jonah, if you're watching, this is for you." The storm outside deepened, rain thrumming against the broken windows of the warehouse like a drumbeat of war. Silas lingered in the shadows, the wet brick wall cold against his back. He counted Mercer's men, 6, maybe 7, and each one armed. Too many to take head on, too many to face in a blaze of bullets. But Mercer wasn't just another lieutenant. He was the past given flesh. And Silas hadn't come here to walk away. He slipped his revolver free, the steel slick with condensation. His thumb brushed the cylinder, checking the weight of 6 rounds that had waited far too long for this night. He steadied himself, then stepped forward, boots crunching on grit as he pushed into the mouth of the warehouse. The guards froze first, eyes narrowing. Then one barked, "Who the hell?" And Eli Mercer turned. For a moment, silence stretched. The lantern light cut across his scarred face, and recognition flickered there. Recognition, and something harder. "Well, I'll be damned." Eli's voice was lower than Silas remembered, but the cadence was the same, the mocking drawl of a man who thought himself untouchable. "Silas Kane crawled out of the grave to find me." "Not a grave," Silas said evenly, revolver trained steady. "Not yet." Mercer laughed, the sound echoing off the rafters. "You always had a taste for the dramatic. Look at you, soaked to the bone, pistol shaking in your hand, dragging ghosts behind you like chains. You should have stayed buried, brother." The word hit harder than any bullet. "Brother." Silas's jaw tightened. "I had 2 brothers," Silas said. His voice was calm, but it carried like thunder. "One's in the ground. The other stands before me, hiding behind hired guns and stolen crowns." The men shifted uneasily, glancing at Mercer. But Eli only smiled, spreading his arms wide. "You think you know what brotherhood is, Silas? You think Jonah died because of me? He died because we fought a war we were never meant to win. He died because you dragged us into your crusade for justice, for truth, for what? The city's soul. Mercer spat the last word like poison. This city has no soul, only power. And I took it. Silas felt the storm inside him rising. The image of Jonah's blood on cobblestones burned in his memory. You sold us out. You sold him out. Don't you dare twist it into anything else. Eli's smile faltered for just a heartbeat. A flicker of something. Remorse? Or just the ghost of it. Then it hardened. Maybe I did. But tell me, Kane, did you never wonder why you survived? Why Jonah didn't? Because between the three of us, you were always the weak one. The dreamer. And dreamers don't last long in this world. Jonah died because he believed in you. And I chose to live. The words cut deep, sharper than steel. For an instant, Silas's grip faltered. He saw Jonah's grin, Jonah's hand clapping his shoulder after the war, Jonah's saying, "We'll always have each other, no matter what." And then he saw Jonah falling, blood soaking his uniform, Eli's shadow vanishing into the smoke. The dreamer died in that alley. What remained was here now. Revolver steady once more. "Put down your gun, Kane," Eli said softly. "Walk away. This is bigger than you. Dawes is building something that can't be stopped. Stand with me, and maybe, just maybe, you'll live to see what comes next. We were brothers once. We could be again." For the briefest second, Silas almost wanted to believe him. The memory of laughter, of firelit nights, of loyalty unbroken. It was a temptation, sharp and sweet. But then he heard the old man's voice in the rain. Jonah's still walking, still waiting for someone to set it right. Silas exhaled. Slowly, firmly, he said, "Brothers don't leave ashes in their wake." The shot cracked through the warehouse like lightning. Chaos erupted. Mercer's men drew their weapons, shouting, scrambling for cover. Silas moved like a phantom, ducking behind crates, firing twice more. One man went down. Another cursed as a bullet grazed his shoulder. Gunpowder thickened the air, mixing with the smell of rain and rust. But through it all, Silas's focus never wavered. Eli Mercer had ducked behind a stack of crates, pistol in hand, barking orders. Their eyes met once more across the smoke. And in that gaze, Silas saw it all. The betrayal, the pride, the flicker of fear he had longed to see. The battle surged on. Crates splintered under gunfire, lanterns shattered, plunging half the warehouse into shadow. Men screamed, metal clanged, and the storm outside howled like the dead themselves. Finally, Mercer's voice rang out over the din, harsh and furious. "This isn't finished, Kane." And then he was gone, slipping out a side door, his men covering his retreat. Silas pressed against the wall, chest heaving, revolver smoking in his grip. The warehouse stank of blood and iron, the echoes of violence still trembling in the rafters. He staggered forward, past the fallen, past the shattered crates, to the door where Mercer had fled. Rain poured through the opening, washing red rivers across the cobblestones outside. Mercer had escaped. For now, Silas holstered his revolver, shoulders heavy. His body ached, his ears rang, but his heart was steady. This night hadn't given him justice, not yet, but it had given him something else. The truth was clear. Eli Mercer wasn't untouchable. He bled, he feared, and he ran. Silas stepped into the storm, letting it soak him clean. Though nothing could ever truly wash away the ashes, he whispered Jonah's name once more, a vow carried on the rain. "This isn't finished, brother. Not until one of us is ash." The city swallowed him again, its neon and smoke reflecting in rivers of storm water. Somewhere Eli Mercer was out there, wounded but breathing, and Silas Kane would follow, until the ghosts were silenced. The storm had not broken for 3 days. Rain lashed the city in sheets, hammering rooftops, choking drains, and turning alleyways into rivers of black water. Thunder cracked over the skyline like the voice of a furious god. Neon lights bled through the downpour, shimmering in the pools on the cobblestones, bending and warping until the city itself seemed to dissolve into a blur of color and smoke. Silas Kane stood at the window of a ruined apartment above Harbor Street. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, gaunt, unshaven, eyes hollowed by exhaustion. His coat was torn, the collar stiff with dried blood, not all of it his own. The city outside was no longer merely a battlefield. It was a graveyard waiting to be filled. On the table behind him lay the revolver, cleaned and loaded, its barrel glinting dully in the flickering light of a single candle. Next to it sat the photograph, the three men in uniform, brothers once, laughter frozen in time. Silas had unfolded it again tonight, though the edges were cracked and the image fading. Jonah Creed's smile haunted him, a ghost forever alive in the paper, even as his bones had long since returned to the earth. And Eli Mercer. Eli was still breathing. Word had come from the woman in the green gown, now stripped of her masquerade. Her name was Isolde Vera, and her loyalty was a question Silas hadn't yet dared to answer. She told him Dawes and Mercer were gathering their lieutenants at the old Opera House, the same grand ruin where the city's elite once sat in velvet and chandeliers, now converted into Dawes's throne room. Tonight, decisions would be made, alliances sealed, and blood spilled. Silas lit a cigarette with a shaking hand. Smoke curled around his face, masking the stench of damp plaster and mold. The Opera House. It was fitting in its way. The city's last act would play out upon that stage. He thought of Jonah again, of the night they swore never to betray each other, of the mud and fire of foreign fields, where they survived because no one else would. He thought of Eli's laughter when they stole whiskey from a captain's tent, and how that same laughter now rang hollow, twisted by power. Once, they were unbreakable, a brotherhood forged in blood and hunger. Now there were only ashes. Silas stubbed out the cigarette, picked up his revolver, and slid it into his holster. The storm howled louder, as if the city itself cried warning, but Silas Kane did not hesitate. He pulled on his hat, tugged his coat tight, and stepped into the rain. The streets shimmered with reflections of neon and lightning. His boots splashed through puddles as he moved steadily toward the Opera House, each step heavier than the last. He passed shuttered shops, burned-out cars, and figures huddled beneath awnings, faces gaunt with hunger, eyes darting like hunted prey. The city's people had always lived beneath the yoke of Dawes and his empire, but tonight, they sensed something different. An ending to a final silence waiting just beyond the storm that ate as he neared the Opera House. The air thickened with menace. Cars lined the street, engines still ticking, their black windows hiding the armed men within. Lanterns glowed at the entrance, casting the great stone pillars in a sickly yellow light. Silas could hear the muffled voices inside, a congregation of predators cloaked in smoke and arrogance. He paused in the shadows across the street, drawing a slow breath. His revolver was steady at his side. His heart was not. "Jonah," he whispered into the storm. "If you're still walking, walk with me now." Then, without another word, Silas Kane crossed the cobblestones and pushed open the doors to the city's final reckoning. The Opera House smelled of mildew and old velvet, its walls scarred by time and war. Yet the grandeur still lingered, a faded echo of chandeliers and polished marble. Now, cigarette smoke clouded the rafters where once music soared, and the stage, where sopranos once sang, had become a dais for criminals. Rows of gilded seats were filled not with patrons, but with Dawes's lieutenants, men in fedoras and tailored coats, their guns holstered but never far from reach. They murmured like vultures around carrion, watching the storm that shook the stained glass high above. To the center, beneath a spotlight of electric glare, sat Victor Dawes himself. His white suit gleamed ghostly in the dim, his cane resting across his knees, his rings glinting with every lazy flick of his hand. Beside him, Eli Mercer leaned casually against the stage rail, a cigarette burning low between his fingers, his smile ablaze in the dark. The murmurs stilled as Silas entered, boots echoing on marble that once hosted orchestras. Dawes's lips curled into something between amusement and disdain. The detective arrives. His voice was rich, controlled, as though each syllable was chosen with care. "Kane, wasn't it? You've caused quite the stir these last weeks. corpses piling higher than the gutters can swallow, gangs at each other's throats. And now you come here, into my house. Silas's eyes flicked across the room. Every seat held an enemy. Every shadow concealed a pistol. Yet he stood straight, his revolver resting easy in its holster, his gaze never leaving Dawes. Your house? Silas's voice carried like steel. This was a place of music once, a place of beauty. Now it's a tomb, and you're sitting on the bones. The room rippled with mutters, some amused, others angered. Dawes only smiled faintly, tapping his cane. Poetic, but pointless. Beauty does not rule a city, Kane. Power does, and power is what I hold. He gestured languidly toward Eli. Your old comrade understood that. He chose to survive, while you, his eyes narrowed. You chose the path of ghosts. Eli stepped forward then, exhaling smoke that curled like a serpent. His eyes gleamed with cruel familiarity. You really don't know when to quit, do you, Silas? He said. You could have taken my offer, walked away. Instead, you come crawling into the lion's den with nothing but a pistol and a grudge. He spread his arms mockingly. Tell me, brother, what do you think you'll accomplish here? Silas felt every eye in the opera house on him. He remembered Jonah again, his laughter, his blood. He remembered the oath they had sworn. And he remembered the night Eli broke it. I came, Silas said, his voice low, steady, to end the noise, to finish what you started. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Even the storm seemed to pause. Then Dawes laughed softly, the sound carrying like velvet over razors. In the noise. My, do you hear him, gentlemen? The lone detective, come to silence and empire. He rose slowly, leaning on his cane, his eyes glinting with cold fire. Kane, do you know what silence truly is? It is not peace. It is not justice. Silence is power. When your enemies are gone, when their voices are ash, that is silence. And that silence will belong to me. Eli flicked his cigarette to the floor, grinding out with his heel. His hand hovered near his pistol. You'll never beat him, Silas. Dawes doesn't fall. He devours. Just like this city. Silas's hand brushed the grip of his revolver. The weight of it was the weight of every ghost, every betrayal. His eyes locked on Eli, and for a heartbeat the opera house fell away. It was only the two of them again. Mud, rain, blood, and broken promises. You're wrong, Silas said quietly. This city's silence won't belong to Dawes. It won't belong to you. It'll belong to Jonah. The name struck Eli like a whip. His smirk faltered, his eyes narrowing. A flash of something raw, anger, pain, memory, flickered across his face. For the first time, his mask cracked. Dawes's gaze sharpened. Jonah, he asked softly, almost curious. Ah, the dead soldier. The third ghost in this little drama. He chuckled darkly. How quaint. Still clinging to phantoms. Silas's reply was a whisper, but it carried like thunder. Phantoms don't forget. The opera house erupted. Guns cleared leather. Men shouting. The orchestra of violence beginning in a single heartbeat. Dawes slammed his cane against the stage. Eli drew, and Silas moved. His revolver flashing in the electric light. His heart pounding with the weight of 1,000 echoes. The final silence had begun. The first gunshot shattered the air like a hammer striking glass. For a heartbeat, the opera house froze. Then the hall exploded into chaos. Lieutenants rose from their seats, revolvers flashing. Bullets ripped into velvet chairs, splintered marble, shattered plaster, angels clinging to the walls. Smoke poured through the air, mixing with the storm's thunder beyond the stained glass. Silas Kane moved like instinct itself. His revolver roared, the bark echoing through the cavernous hall. A man fell screaming from the balcony. Another collapsed across the aisle, clutching his chest. Silas dove for cover behind a row of seats, shards of wood exploding as slugs slammed into them. Dawes stood untouched on the stage, cane in one hand, barking orders with calm authority. Close the doors. Box him in. Do not let Kane leave this hall alive. His voice never faltered. Even his blood ran across the boards. Eli Mercer was already moving. He vaulted from the stage to the aisle with the grace of a soldier still honed from war. His gun tracked Silas's cover, each shot forcing him lower. Sparks spat as bullets carved into iron. "Come on, Silas." Eli's voice was ragged with adrenaline, but still taunting. "This is how it ends. Not with justice. Not with your damned ghosts. It ends with me, like it should have from the start." Silas clenched his jaw, forcing his breathing steady. He could hear the storm outside, rain hammering like drumbeats. His hand brushed the worn photo in his pocket. Jonah's face watching, always watching. He whispered to himself, "Not yet. Not until it's done." He broke cover, rolling into the aisle. His revolver snapped up, firing twice. The first shot clipped a man on the balcony. The second grazed Eli's shoulder. Eli staggered, snarling, his smile twisting into something feral. "You bastard," he roared, charging forward. They crashed together among the broken seats, fists striking harder than bullets. Years of brotherhood turned to violence. Silas felt the crunch of knuckles against his jaw, the taste of blood filling his mouth. He answered with a headbutt that split Eli's lip. They grappled, their pistols skittering away across the floor. "You left him to die." Silas snarled through clenched teeth, driving Eli back against a shattered seat. "Jonah was your brother." Eli spat blood into his face, eyes burning with fury. "Jonah was weak. You were weak. Dawes gave us a chance to be more than soldiers rotting in mud. He gave us a crown, and you're too blind to wear it." Silas's fist smashed into Eli's ribs, each blow a memory, each strike a ghost unleashed. A crown of rot, a throne built on graves. The struggle ended in a desperate scramble for Eli's pistol. Both men lunged, hands locking on the grip. Their eyes met, and for an instant the years fell away. The laughter, the nights by the fire, the oaths sworn beneath stars. For a moment, Silas almost faltered, but then Jonah's face returned, the last breath he had taken in Eli's arms, the betrayal that silenced him forever. The gun thundered that Eli's body jerked. His eyes widened in shock, in fury, in something that might have been regret. He sagged into Silas's arms, coughing blood, his voice breaking. "You should have worn the crown." Silas held him for a heartbeat longer, then let him fall. Eli Mercer, the brother he once knew, lay still among the broken seats. The opera house was still alive with violence. Dawes's men pressed forward, but fear had begun to crack their lines. Silas, bloodied and burning, rose to his feet and strode through the chaos, revolver once again in his hand. He carved a path toward the stage, each step inexorable, each shot ringing final. Victor Dawes watched from his dais, calm as a king awaiting his challenger. His cane rested across his knees, but his eyes burned with venomous pride. "Well," Dawes said as Silas mounted the stage, breath ragged, rain dripping from his coat, Eli's blood still on his hands. "You've killed your friend. Topple my lieutenants. But tell me, Kane, what now? Do you believe you can kill me, and the city will suddenly change? That silence will heal its wounds." Silas leveled his revolver. His voice was hoarse but steady. "This isn't about silence anymore. It's about ending the noise you've made." Dawes chuckled, rising slowly. He lifted his cane, and with a twist, revealed the slender blade hidden within. "Then come, detective. Let's finish this properly. The lion and the jackal." The storm roared as the two men circled. Dawes lunged, the blade flashing in the electric glare. Silas fired once, missing by inches as the crime lord closed the distance. The cane-turned sword slashed across Silas's arm, searing pain tearing through him. He staggered, but his revolver came up again. Dawes struck the weapon aside with startling strength, driving him backward across the stage. The old boards groaned beneath their struggle, echoes of forgotten arias beneath their violence. "You are nothing, Kane," Dawes hissed, his blade pressing close. "A ghost clinging to a dead brother. You think killing me will save this city? It will devour you just the same." Silas's eyes narrowed, fury and grief fusing into clarity. "Maybe, but I won't let it devour anyone else." He twisted, forcing Dawes off balance. The The revolver came up between them, pressed against Dawes' chest. For a heartbeat, both men froze. The empire of one, the ghosts of the other. Then the revolver thundered. Victor Dawes staggered, his white suit blooming crimson. His cane clattered to the boards, his mouth opening in disbelief. He looked at Silas not with fear, but with something almost like admiration. "You fool," he whispered, blood seeping from his lips. Now the silence truly begins. He collapsed, the opera house trembling with the storm outside. The battle ceased. The lieutenants, seeing their king fall, scattered like rats. Gunfire dwindled into echoes, then into nothing at all. Silas Kane stood alone on the stage, revolver hanging at his side, chest heaving. The storm raged above, lightning painting the ruined hall in violent light. Around him lay the dead, the empire of Dawes, the brotherhood of Eli, the ashes of a city. And in that moment, the silence came to it was not peace. It was not victory. It was the heavy, unbearable quiet of an ending. Silas holstered his revolver, his hand brushing the photo one last time. Jonah's face, Eli's smile, all of it fading into the shadows of memory. He looked out across the opera house, the rows of empty seats, and knew the city would never truly change. But he had done what he could. He had broken the crown, silenced the tyrant, and avenged the brotherhood that once was. He stepped down from the stage, boots echoing through the emptiness. The rain was waiting, washing blood from the cobblestones outside. Silas Kane walked into the storm. Behind him, the opera house stood silent at last, the final silence. The city had grown quieter, not peaceful, never peaceful, but quieter. Weeks had passed since the opera house drowned in blood and thunder, since Victor Dawes' empire cracked apart and spilled its poison into the gutters. Now the smoke had thinned, though the smell lingered in alleys where fire had kissed old brick. The neon still buzzed, but its glow felt dimmer, sickly, as if mourning the spectacle it once illuminated. People returned to the streets with cautious steps, whispering that the lion was dead, that the throne was broken. And yet, the underworld had not vanished. Power never truly died. It shifted, it crawled, it waited. Silas Kane sat alone at a corner table in a waterfront cafe that never seemed to close. The coffee in front of him had long gone cold, but he kept his hands around it anyway, letting the weight of the cup anchor him to the moment. Rain tapped against the window in slow rhythm, steady and patient. Like a clock with no face, he looked tired. Not simply from sleepless nights or wounds still healing beneath his coat, but from carrying too many ghosts. Eli's voice still clung to him, as did Jonah's silence. Dawes' last words gnawed at the edges of his mind. Now the silence truly begins. Silas reached into his pocket, withdrawing the worn photograph. Jonah, Eli, and himself. 3 men younger, freer, believing they could carve something out of the world after the war. Their smiles looked foreign now, like the faces of strangers. "Ghosts," Silas muttered, setting the photo down beside the untouched coffee. "That's all we ever were." A voice pulled him back. The cafe owner, a woman with kind eyes that had seen too much, placed a fresh cup before him. "On the house," she said softly, "for what you did." Silas gave a faint nod, but didn't touch it. The city liked to whisper its gratitude in half measures, but he knew the truth. No one wanted a man like him around too long. Not the law, not the gangs, not the civilians who pretended the war between them didn't brush their doorsteps. He was a reminder of what it cost to keep the city breathing. When she left him again, Silas lifted the photograph once more. For a long moment, he simply stared, as though waiting for it to speak. Then, with a steady hand, he slid it into the flame of the cafe's small candle. The edges curled, blackened, turned to ash. He let it burn down until the last trace of their smiles was gone. Outside, thunder rolled again. The rain came harder, rattling the glass. Silas stood, pulling on his coat, his hat casting his face in a shadow. The city awaited him, fractured but alive. He could already hear new whispers, new names rising in the void Dawes had left behind. There would always be another war, another betrayal, another crown poisoned by greed. That was the truth of this place and of men like him. But for now, there was only the rain, only the quiet streets, washed clean for a little while. Silas stepped out into it, the drops soaking into his coat, into his skin, into the silence he carried with him like a second soul. He lit a cigarette, the flame brief against the storm, and walked with no destination but forward. The city breathed around him, broken, haunted, waiting, and Silas Kane disappeared into its silence.